Chapter 1. I'm going to drop out of dental school. I spoke on the phone. There was silence on the other end. I just don't think it's how I'm going to build something great. I need to create something substantial. And this is not going to happen by spending all my time on this, I said as I waved my hand towards a PowerPoint lecture I'd been memorizing. More silence. Telling my fiance that I was going to drop out of school was not exactly the smartest thing I could have done, especially if I actually wanted her to go through with actually marrying me, and especially after I had already sank a non-refundable $200,000 in the past 2 years into this. But for the life of me, I just couldn't figure out how dental school was going to get me any closer to accomplishing my goal. I've always wanted to create something, build something. What's the word? Great? Worthy? It started when I immigrated to the U.S. with my parents. My mom was a housekeeper and my dad made pizza for Domino's during the week, and on the weekends, he stood outside of Home Depot waiting for construction gigs. And together on Saturday nights, we would all go to a warehouse and assemble stacks and stacks of Sunday morning newspapers. Now, they got paid by how many stacks they made, and when the papers were all folded and stacked, they looked like giant staircases going to the middle of nowhere. And one day, I wanted to climb those staircases, but when they refused, I decided to kick one over. And they started dominoing, and they all fell over, and it ruined their work for the entire evening. Now, back in Peru, they were dentists. But here we lived this hustle. They worked these odd jobs during the day, and they studied at night, working towards passing their U.S. dental boards to become licensed dentists here in the States. Now, I was a scrappy 7-year-old kid when my parents finally got their letter that would tell them if they had passed their exam. Pasamos! They yelled. They had both passed. They gave each other a big kiss. As I launched myself off of the couch, I clung to them and I yelled, "Somos ricos!" which meant, "We're rich" in Spanish. We had finally made it. We celebrated with the complimentary pizza that my dad got every Friday that he brought home from work from Domino's. The next phase of my life was a lot different. Kids told me things such as, "Things must be so easy for you because your parents are dentists." And adults said things like, "You are so lucky. Life must be so easy for you." Now, whenever me and my siblings would ever complain about school or an exam or anything, my dad would say, "You think this is hard? Try taking an exam in a foreign language. Try studying on an empty stomach." Then my mom would chime in, "Don't worry, hijo. I took my dental board exam after spending the entire night in labor with your sister. You're going to be just fine." Now, I didn't know why, but we were constantly moving. Every 2 to 3 years I was in a new school, I would be the new kid with the funny last name. The moment I dreaded the most was when the teacher would introduce me for the first time. "Children, today we have a new face in the classroom. We have here Mr. Ivan Chicchon. Ivan Chicchon." The whole classroom would always burst out into uncontrolled laughter. Embarrassed, I would try to laugh along with them. Not surprisingly, some kids would carry this joke to the playground. Most were just having fun, but there was always one person who wanted to try to bully me. So I learned to deal with bullies swiftly. To be the most effective, I had to take care of the situation immediately. This was my bully quashing checklist. Step 1 was step right up to them toe to toe. Step 2, get in their face, although I would usually only be as tall as their chest. Step 3, don't blink. Don't be the first one to look away. And step 4, threaten to clobber them with my fist or with a Ziploc full of pogs. The more aggressive the bully, the more crazy you'd have to be initially. They had to know that this little dude was nuts. They had to think that I was willing to go to the next level over this spat. And it was kind of crazy, but my Macho Man Randy Savage poster said the best defense was a good offense. And I probably took that one a bit too far. But I also sought acceptance from the group, bullies and all. Never really fitting in, I wanted to impress my classmates. "I know I just threatened to clobber you, but do you want to play pogs?" I always felt somehow apart, on the outside looking in. So from a very young age, I looked for ways to succeed on my own accord, to say, "Look at this, everyone. I did this. I made this. I built this. And it's awesome." Although I sought acceptance from my peers and from my parents, I actually think I sought acceptance from myself. I felt like I needed to earn my own approval, permission to be proud of myself. I think think part of that came from my dad. He would often wake me and my brother and sister up by throwing cold water on us from the doorway, saying, "Time to get up and get to work. We're not raising lazy kids." And that became my inner voice. We're not lazy. Get to work. So I hustled. I became the kid buying and selling Beanie Babies and Pokemon cards. I went door to door selling car wash services. One day I brought loaded dice to school. They were rigged to land on 7, and I hustled my classmates on the blacktop. While my classmates were watching Pokemon, I bought audio lesson cassettes titled "Negotiate Like the Pros" at the flea market. And then I watched Pokemon. I read business books, and I also learned a lot from watching my parents as they built their dental businesses. My parents were my ever-present heroes, and they were total opposites from one another. My mom always encouraged me. She always wanted me to explore new things. She said things like, "You can do it, hijo." She saw that I liked to take my time and do things meticulously, so she took to calling me her Tortuga Ninja, or Ninja Turtle. Although she worked just as hard as my dad, she also was fully committed to finding ways for me to learn, to grow, and to be happy. And when I was 5 years old, my mom found out that the Power Rangers were coming to Florida, and she made sure that we tracked them down. She climbed over tables and pushed her way through a crowd just to make sure that we secured a spot in the front of the line so I could proudly collect my autograph from the White Ranger. Then when I was 12, she found out that my favorite WWF wrestler, Bret the Hitman Hart, was coming to California. And just like before, she made sure that I got to meet my hero. When I was obsessed with web design in 7th grade, she sent me to a coding boot camp at Stanford. Then in 8th grade, when I told my mom I wanted to become an Olympic wrestler, she found a wrestling club for me in a nearby city. And when she picked me up after my first day of practice, I hobbled over to the car. My face was scratched up and red. My shirt was torn. And my mom secretly was hoping that I hated it. Thinking that I had a bad experience, she said, "Ivancito, are you okay? Did you get hurt?" My eyes lit up. I said, "Yeah, it was awesome." And then she sent me to an Olympic wrestling camp in Ohio. She was always my biggest cheerleader, and aside from the Bible verses that she told me on a daily basis, the quote that I remember her most telling me was from Sir Winston Churchill. It goes, "Never give in, never give in, never, 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 never. In nothing great or small, large or petty, never give up in anything, except to convictions of honor and good sense." And throughout my life, she was the embodiment of that quote. Now, my dad, he was a totally different animal. He was always on beast mode. He worked harder and faster than anyone else and could be a bit rough around the edges. As a matter of fact, if you ever asked him to help you move your furniture, you were in trouble. He's so fast and so aggressive in his movements that he would, with 100% certainty, injure the person that he was helping. If his own fingers got crunched or the dresser fell on his foot, it didn't seem to bother him. He was cut from a different cloth. He was as tough as they came. He also enjoyed life more than anyone else. You can always find him with a drill in his hands, a dental drill or a power drill, or with a guitar, dancing as he played La Bamba. The way he lived his life told me, you can enjoy life as long as you earn it with your hands. He was generous to a fault, always giving freely to his friends, even if he had only just met them. When I was a kid, I remember telling him that I would become a successful businessman, so he took me on ride-alongs with him to teach me about business. He took me to the flea market and told me, if you want to learn real business, all I had to do was watch people at the market. He said, this is where you find people with the eye of the tiger, people who are hungry. One day he took me to the dealership and he allowed me to negotiate a car purchase on his behalf. He would just sit there nonchalantly flipping through a magazine while I haggled down the fees and options with a horrified salesman who found himself negotiating with the kid. As I sat in the car with him on these ride-alongs, he'd tell me, your most valuable asset is your time, Ivancito. Never waste it. He always pushed me, dared me to do things. A constant source of idea, he would say things like, you should buy an air jumper and rent it out. You'll make a killing. Or, you should buy a vending machine and distribute them all over the city. You'll make tons of money. Or, I know a guy who did fill in the blank, and now he's filthy rich. He would stare deep into your eyes as he enunciated the words, filthy. But my attempts to impress him always fell short. He always thought I should do more, accomplish more, be more. So I tried harder, and I tended to take things a bit too far, or to go big or go home, as I often said to myself. And that landed me in trouble, especially as I entered high school. Right before I started my freshman year, we moved again. This time it was to the farmlands of Central Valley, California, to a city called Stockton, where my parents had just purchased their new dental clinic from retiring dentists. And we didn't know it then, but Stockton would soon become labeled as America's most miserable city. After the housing crash of '08, it became the biggest U.S. city to go bankrupt, and it would become notorious for homicides, home invasions, and robberies. It was a tough city, but we didn't know that yet. All I knew was that, again, I was the new kid from another city with the funny last name in school. And if I hoped that the kids in high school would be more mature, that first day proved me wrong. My immediate aggressive responses to the would-be bullies would have them stand down and leave me alone. But knowing nobody and having a big chip on my shoulder, I looked for ways to prove myself. So I tried out for wrestling. On the first day of tryouts, the guys made fun of my last name, pronouncing it as Chicken. When I beat everyone down and I held my own against the upperclassmen, they modified that nickname to Crazy Chicken, as in, don't mess with Chicken, he's crazy. They soon became my second family. When it came to matches and tournaments, my parents were always there to shout from the bleachers and to hug me as I walked off the mat. Although after a while it became too stressful for my mom to bear, so she would instead wait at home and get the details from me after. But my dad always made sure to follow me to every single event. He was always present to help me warm up before a match and to walk silently outside afterwards. Wrestling's an intense sport. Each round gives you 2 minutes to dominate your opponent, which means that there's no downtime. And you always hear shouts from the sidelines saying, "Explode!" We're always encouraged to leave it on the mat, which meant that you should wrestle so hard that you shouldn't have any energy left over after a match. When I was busy with wrestling, I didn't have time to cause trouble. But as soon as the off-season hit, I got restless, and I looked for more hustles to occupy my time. For instance, I found that I could steal things and then resell them at school, so I organized a group of kids that would go with me to a store and we'd make a killing, especially since I had fashioned this button-down shirt with a hidden pocket in it, and it discreetly transferred stolen objects down into my pant leg. Now, of course, it was my mom that was the one who had taught me to sew, and she probably wondered why I had taken such a sudden interest in tailoring clothes. As I left stores carrying the stolen loot, I had to walk in just the right way, sort of hunched over with a slight limp to avoid revealing this huge lump in my pants. But now that I think of it, that's not really any less suspicious. But in another shameful venture, I also started growing several marijuana plants in my closet, hoping to be a cannabis entrepreneur. When my mom found out that I had this stash in my closet, she was absolutely crestfallen that her Ivancito would get mixed up in this. She had always been there for me. When we were kids, she had read us Bible stories that taught us what it meant to be a good person and a good Christian. Her guidance did leave an impact on me. I did want to do good things. I wanted to make a positive impact in the world. But for a kid in high school, religious teachings just can't compete with popularity and fitting in with the tribe. "Call the police," my dad ordered. "We have to teach our son a lesson." As I waited for the police to arrive, I had the bright idea to flush my prized possessions down the toilet, like I had seen in the mob movies. I kept my mouth shut during questioning. "What plants?" Coincidentally, on that same day, I had just been expelled from my high school for fighting and attempting to run a business within the school. Stealing had been so lucrative for me that I carried this new skill set to my school. I stole protein bars, mainly because they were the most expensive small item, and I resold them outside by the lunch tables. And as a bonus, they were my favorite flavor, so I could snack on any of my surplus inventory. It was a win-win. It was all going super smoothly until one day the priest who oversaw the store, and yes, he was actually a real priest, he came to my table and he accused me of stealing. He said that the student who was working at the cash register claimed that he saw me stuff my pocket full of these candy bars. They were protein bars. I pretended to be appalled. "Me?" and I got taken in for questioning. They searched my backpack, but luckily I had already sold the loot. So they let me off. They let me off with a warning. I should have been happy to get off so easily. I should have laid low. But instead, I went to the store to have a face-off with my accuser. Well, it wasn't necessarily face-to-face. It was more like face-to-chest. He was 6'3", he was a football player, and I was 132 pounds. He probably had 70 pounds on me. "Why did you snitch on me like a bitch?" I stared him down as I shouted. This was the part where you had to make them think you're crazy, remember? He lumbered forward from behind the cash register. "I ain't no bitch," he yelled and towered over me. I didn't break my stare. Then a shove sent me crashing into this big aluminum bench behind me. I immediately got up, walked up to him, and started exploding with punches. I had to make good on my threat. Just like when I was a kid, I felt these things needed to be dealt with swiftly and decisively. Instantly, I decided jabs wouldn't work. I just wouldn't reach. My arms were too short. So instead, I swung wide and went for haymakers. See, my buddy David from the wrestling team has showed me how to use this technique. He was only 103 pounds, but when he put on a pair of boxing gloves, he could beat the crap out of anybody on the whole team. Now I got to put this technique to use. I connected a couple of hard blows to the cheekbones that I was super proud of, given that it was quite a reach for me. And then I made the mistake of trying to go for a double leg takedown with my backpack on. Now, with his bearish weight and my backpack holding me back, we hit a stalemate just as people rushed in to break up the fight. For me, it was a hell of a time. I enjoyed the fight. I enjoyed the rush of it, the fun of trying to defeat your opponent. The people began to cheer. Seeing that my opponent was angry, I said, "Hey man, it was a good fight." And I tried to give him a hug. But this guy was fuming, and I couldn't understand why. As far as I was concerned, we both gave our best and we could shake hands and walk it off, just like a wrestling match. As fun as it was, that fight immediately got me expelled from school, and I was at an all-time low. After some pleading, my parents found a way to get me into a school in the neighboring city. But it was the middle of junior year, and I didn't know anybody, and I wasn't really looking to make any friends. But then as I strolled into Mr. Knox's English class, I spotted a girl. She was absolutely gorgeous. She was wholesome. And in class, I learned her name was Teresa. And I heard someone whisper behind me that she thought I was cute. She was different than me. I was restless, while she radiated warmth and peace. And when our eyes met, I saw something that I'd never seen before. I instantly felt at peace. She was laughing with her friends, and looking into her big brown eyes, I felt like I had known her a lifetime. I knew I needed to ask her out on a date because I thought if she only get to know me, we would fall in love. And of course, I tried some of the usual pickup lines, but they didn't work. She saw right through me, and she warned me that she can't date anybody who does shady things. Who, me? She knew I was a bit different, and maybe not right for her. And although she continued to deny my request to take her out on a date, she still walked over to talk to me with suspicious regularity. So I kept stopping by her desk to say hi and to ask her to let me take her on a date. Until one night in July, she finally let me take her to the movies. We watched Harry Potter. And before dropping her off at home, we shared our first kiss. At that point, I dropped everything. I quit wrestling. I quit the childish stunts. I spent all of my time with Teresa. And maybe it was due to my new relationship with Teresa. Maybe it was the heartbreak that I saw in my mom's eyes when the sheriff interrogated me. Whatever the reason, by this time, I had decided to thoroughly clean up my act. That year, some people had also broken into my parents' new dental office and stolen a lot of their hard-earned things. I felt what it was like to be on the other end of theft, and I decided that I would succeed not by tricking anybody, but by creating something people loved. Theft was cowardly, but building value, building something that people loved, now that was worthy of pursuit. Teresa and I stayed in love even as we went on to college. And I saw college as basically a fresh start. There were no assholes in college, just people trying to learn. And it was around this time that my mom, who was always trying to keep her Ivancito on the right path, gifted me this book that was profoundly influential on me. It was called Freakonomics by Stephen Levitt. This gem was exactly what I needed. It unraveled the secret power that governs our society, economics, It explained the laws of economics using wild examples such as how sumo wrestlers decide to cheat, how most drug dealers still live with their moms, and he explained how incentives rule the world and how we take environmental cues to decide how to behave. Fired up about this new discipline that seemed to explain everything, I chose to major in economics. And I specifically honed in on economic history and on Latin American revolutions because it reminded me of what my grandfather used to teach me as a young boy. When he would enter the room, he would come and turn off my TV show, take out a pen and paper from his pocket, and teach me a lesson. He would explain the history of the world and principles of logic, of mathematics, and economics. I treasured this man's advice like it was wisdom scrawled on an ancient scroll. He taught me how the Spanish conquistadors ravaged South America and killed off the Incas to take their gold. He recounted how the region eventually won back its freedom through revolutionary freedom fighters. He was an economist by training, so he thought there were lessons to learn in these stories, lessons of good versus evil. He taught me of capitalism from the readings of Adam Smith and communism from Karl Marx. And so in college, I continued where he left off. I learned how these oppressive regimes persisted in South America, how large multinational corporations savagely exploited the working class. Now, in modern day, many of these companies have been charged with crimes against humanity, but throughout the 1900s, big, powerful companies destroyed lives in order to reap massive profits. And this is what sparked a series of revolutions all across Latin America, notably in Cuba, through the communist revolutionaries Che Guevara and Fidel Castro. And these revolutions caused chaos, caused bloodshed. And this is the reason actually why my family left Peru when I was 2 years old. I learned the deep impact that economics has. While business and economics can be used to improve people's lives, it can also create oppressive systems that yield massive profits to some, but horrendous consequences to others. As I studied, this story moved me. I fell in love with the theme of right versus wrong. And the boy in me was reminded of Star Wars, the rebels versus the dark side. As much as my teenage shenanigans might have shown otherwise, the Christian in me saw the potential way to have a positive impact on the world. I wanted to impact the world in a positive way. Now, this realization became deeply ingrained within me ever since, just as ingrained as the ethos that my dad passed on. Don't be lazy. I did continue my hustles, but this time they were legitimate ideas. They were ways to create value and to turn that value into a business. Now, by the time I graduated college, I must have tried over 30 different failed ventures, and Teresa was with me for each and every one. But my great idea still eluded me. I thought that maybe I should continue on to more schooling, getting a master's in economics. But my grandfather convinced me that I should go on to dental school and build on the foundation that my parents already laid. He said everyone should learn history and economics, but to build a business, you have to have a deep technical skill set, and you got to do that in the dental field. So I went beast mode. I got to studying, and within a year or so, I crammed through all my prerequisites. I applied, and I got in. Now, immediately after I found out that I got accepted to dental school, I whisked Teresa off to Napa, and after a hot air balloon ride over the valley, I serenaded her in front of a small group of family and friends, and I asked her to marry me. Despite her best instincts, she said yes. See, I had waited until after I was accepted to dental school in order to propose to her because I needed to be able to show that I could provide financially. That was important. And we had this little acceptance party. It was a dental school acceptance party at my house, and my Aunt Gloria came over and she brought over a tooth-shaped cake. And I asked my dad, "Are you proud?" He didn't look pleased. He replied, "Son, I'm not surprised that you got in. Look how much support you have. Remember, you're supposed to accomplish more than your parents." Now, I was wounded, but I stayed quiet. Maybe because I agreed with what he said, that inside I knew that I wasn't yet worthy of praise. Now I was in dental school. I was tooth deep in biochemistry, pharmacology, dental anatomy. I was drowning in class 2 test cases, perio charting, and struggling to get my clinical notes approved. The degree to which I became familiar with all things related to teeth was mind-numbing. I started having dreams about outlines of cavity preparations. The world became teeth. and binge drinking with friends on the weekends. And for the life of me, I could not fathom what relevance any of this had towards building my business. Yet it was eating away all of my time. The clock was ticking. I was 25 and felt like I hadn't accomplished anything that I could be proud of, or that my dad could be proud of. You're supposed to accomplish more than your parents, I thought to myself. Even if I complete all this work in dental school, it's still not enough. So I panicked. And in moments of pressure, my instinct is to scramble. I often think back to high school wrestling. There are moments in competition where neither wrestler has the upper hand, where they're both exposed and they both need to quickly find the dominant positioning. So you scramble like hell, risking yourself momentarily in order to gain the competitive advantage. I always loved that part. So now it was time to scramble. That's why I have to drop out, babe. This just isn't the way, I explained to Teresa on the phone. I felt so stupid, irresponsible. I felt like an idiot for insisting on pursuing my dream to build something great. We proceeded to have one of those long, you better get your shit together type of discussions that couples have. Then, after midnight, fueled by frustration and several bottles of Red Stripe from my fridge, I scribbled out all the possibilities on my whiteboard in the kitchen. I wrote out all of the things that I enjoyed about dentistry. Implantology was the main thing. It was the only thing. So I decided I had to double down. After graduation, I could not stay a general dentist. I would have to pursue one of the specialties that allows you to be an authority on implants. Now, those were either oral surgery, periodontics, or prosthodontics. I crossed off oral surgery because it was common knowledge that you had to be at the top of your class to be accepted to one of those programs. I was nowhere near the top. I crossed out periodontics because the lectures that I had attended about the myriad ways to measure the gums had always made me slam my face against the keyboard. So prosthodontics was the only choice. For inspiration, I Googled some leaders in prosthodontics, and I found Mish, who was the most successful implant educator of his time. But that didn't really resonate with me, so I kept searching. And then I found the CEO. The CEO was a phenom. He had blazed his own trail. He had founded implant companies and then had them acquired by industry giants. And the most recent one was one of the biggest and most well-known players in the entire industry. He rode a Harley, he flew a plane, he had a beach house, he lived life on his own terms. He did things his own way. Now this was a level of badassery I could get on board with. Surely this would be worthy. Not only would my dad be proud of me, but maybe I could be proud of myself. So I decided this was it. I decided that one day I would build an implant company and it would be worthy of this elusive approval I sought. I decided that one day I was going to be an implant badass like the CEO.